I am 31 years old, a teacher living in Boston. My life is quiet, built around predictable routines and the comfort of small joys. I visit my mother every Sunday without fail. She is 58, full of energy, always trying new hobbies, always convinced the next book or seminar will change her life. After my parents divorced when I was 2, she raised me alone and never remarried. When I was younger, I used to ask about my father, but she always smiled that same sad smile and said some stories are better left untold. 3 months ago, she told me she had started therapy. She said it was time to face her past and understand why she avoided love. I was happy for her. For years, I had encouraged her to talk to someone. The change was almost immediate. She started dressing up again, humming while cooking, calling me just to say goodnight. There was a spark in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. But she avoided mentioning her therapist's name, saying only that he listened to her in ways no one ever had. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she had finally found someone who helped her move on from the pain she never talked about. Until one evening last week, when she called me with unusual excitement in her voice. She said she wanted me to come over for dinner on Friday to meet someone who had been helping her heal. I assumed it was a friend from her support group, maybe another widow or a counselor she admired. When I arrived, I knew immediately that something was different. The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. The table was set for 3, candles flickering, the good wine chilling in the ice bucket. She even wore makeup, a soft blue dress I hadn't seen in years. I teased her, saying it looked like she was going on a date. She blushed and told me not to be silly, that she simply wanted to celebrate how far she had come. We chatted while she moved between the kitchen and the dining room, her laughter light and unguarded. But underneath it all, there was a nervous energy I couldn't ignore. Every few seconds, she glanced at the clock. When the doorbell finally rang, she froze for a moment, then exhaled slowly as if steadying herself before walking to the door. I stood by the table, adjusting a plate, expecting some friendly middle-aged woman or maybe a kind-faced counselor. But when the door opened, I heard a deep voice I didn't recognize. A man stepped inside, tall, with gray at his temples and a calm confidence that filled the room. He held a bottle of wine and smiled as if he already knew me. My mother's face softened, almost glowing. She said my name, like an introduction she had rehearsed 1,000 times. He turned toward me, his gaze steady. For a moment, the room felt smaller. His features were sharp but familiar. There was something about the way he stood, the way his eyes searched mine, that made my heart thump unevenly. He extended his hand, and I noticed the same long fingers I had. His voice carried a quiet certainty when he said it was good to finally meet me. I didn't know what he meant, but my mother's eyes said everything. The warmth in her expression had turned into something fragile, almost pleading. My throat tightened as a dozen childhood memories came flooding back, the blank spaces in family albums, the awkward silences when Father's Day came around, the letters I never received. I sat down slowly, unsure if I was supposed to shake his hand or demand an explanation. My mother poured wine with trembling hands, her voice soft as she said that he was her therapist. Then she stopped, glanced at him, and the word lingered in the air like smoke. I could tell there was more, but she didn't know how to say it. He smiled again, calm and patient, as if waiting for me to connect the final dots. And when I looked at him once more, really looked, I saw the truth in his face, the same line between the brows, the same eyes that never quite settled. The resemblance was undeniable. The room went silent except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. My mother's lips trembled, her eyes glistening. My pulse raced, my thoughts colliding all at once. For 30 years, she had kept his name buried, and now here he was, standing in her living room as if time had been nothing more than a pause. In that single instant, the air changed. The candles flickered. My entire life, every unanswered question, every quiet evening wondering who I came from, all converged into that moment. I realized that dinner wasn't about therapy or healing. It was about unveiling the ghost of my past, the man who had given me his face, but not his presence. And as I met his eyes across the table, I understood that nothing about this evening would end the way she had planned. He extended his hand toward me with a calmness that felt rehearsed. The sound of his voice saying my name made the air heavy. "It's good to finally meet you," he said, as if this were a long-anticipated reunion instead of a 30-year betrayal. The word finally echoed in my mind like thunder rolling through an empty house. My mother stood beside him, frozen halfway between pride and fear. She poured wine with shaking hands, her eyes darting between us as if she could control the tension by avoiding it. She introduced him as David, her therapist, and then her voice faltered. The pause stretched long enough to say everything she couldn't. I did not need her to finish. The truth was standing right there, wearing my features like a mirror I never asked for. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile that felt like broken glass. Dinner began, though I barely tasted a thing. He talked as if we were three old friends catching up, describing how therapy had helped Mom confront old regrets, how forgiveness could free the soul. His words were smooth, confident, the kind you read in self-help books. Mom kept nodding along, her voice soft and distant, repeating phrases like closure and healing. Every sentence felt like a performance written to justify his reappearance. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with a faint smile. "You have your mother's kindness, but my discipline," he said proudly, as though fatherhood were something he could claim retroactively. My stomach clenched. I forced a laugh, but it came out bitter, almost mocking. "You did something, all right." The room fell silent. Mom's face drained of color. She whispered my name, begging me to stop, but it was too late. I asked him where he had been all these years, why he had never reached out, why he thought showing up now with a bottle of wine and a charmed smile could erase decades of absence. He began to answer in that calm, therapist tone, talking about mistakes and second chances, but every word only fueled the anger building in my chest. I told him to stop pretending this was a family reunion. It was a crime scene, and the evidence was 30 years of silence. Mom tried to intervene, her voice trembling as she told me that she only wanted peace, that she wanted us to be whole again. I turned to her, my heart breaking and burning all at once. "You invited him here like a surprise guest star, hoping dinner would fix a lifetime of abandonment. You didn't even warn me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she tried to speak, but the sound that came out was small and helpless. David reached for his glass, clearing his throat as if searching for control. He said he had made mistakes, but had changed, that therapy had given him clarity, that he wanted to rebuild. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "You lost the right to talk about rebuilding when you left," I said quietly. He tried again, but I raised a hand. "You had your chance to be a father. That position is permanently filled by the silence you left behind." The air felt thick as I pushed away from the table. Mom followed me with her eyes, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She whispered for me to stay, but the sound of my pulse drowned her out. I walked to the door, my hands trembling, unsure if I was angrier at him for leaving or at her for letting him back in. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard her crying softly, the kind of cry that comes from a heart breaking under the weight of its own hope. The image of her standing beside him stayed in my mind as I drove away, the streetlights flickering across my windshield. I realized that the past had not returned to heal us. It had only come back to remind me that some wounds never close, no matter how many times you set the table for forgiveness. For an entire week, my phone turned into a battlefield. Messages poured in one after another, my mother's name flashing every hour, followed by the familiar unknown number that belonged to him. Her voicemails were long, trembling, filled with guilt and pleading. She wanted me to understand, to forgive, to meet them both again and talk like adults. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the quiver that came from loving someone who had already broken her once. Then came his emails, written like therapy notes, each one stretched into paragraphs about redemption, about finding God, about wanting to make amends. He used phrases like emotional repair and family restoration, as if language could erase history. I deleted every single one of them without reading to the end. Silence became my shield, but curiosity started to crawl under it. Something about his confidence bothered me. He spoke as if his reappearance had divine approval, as if I should be grateful he decided to show up after 30 years. One evening, I call an old friend of my mother's, someone who knew her from before the divorce. When I mentioned his name, she hesitated, then whispered that he wasn't any therapist at all. He had found my mother through a mutual acquaintance months earlier, saying he was sober now, that he regretted everything, that he only wanted closure. He had used the word healing like bait, and she had fallen for it. The discovery felt like betrayal layered on betrayal. My mother had trusted him enough to reopen wounds she had spent half her life trying to close. And he had walked right back in, pretending to offer therapy while building his own twisted redemption story. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every image of him at that dinner table replayed in my mind. The calm eyes, the calculated warmth, the way he acted like he had earned a place at that table. I decided I needed to see who he really was, not through his words, but through the trail he left behind. The next morning, I went through old boxes in my closet, the ones labeled legal documents and childhood. Birth certificates, custody records, old court papers, everything my mother had quietly buried. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. His signature, bold and deliberate, at the bottom of a document that said voluntary termination of parental rights. I read it twice to be sure. He hadn't been forced to leave. He had chosen to. Digging further, I traced his name online. Within an hour, I found his profile in another state. He had a new life, a wife, 2 grown children, photos of family holidays, smiling faces under Christmas lights. He looked happy, comfortable, a man who had built an entire legacy on top of the silence he left behind. That night, I gathered everything I found into a single folder and sent screenshots to my mother. I didn't write a long message, just a few words that carried all the weight of 30 years. This is the man you let back into your home. The next morning, I woke up to 10 missed calls from her and 1 new email from a name I didn't recognize. It was his wife. She had found my message because he used their shared computer. Her tone was polite at first, almost curious, but the more I read, the sharper it became. She didn't know he had reconnected with my mother. She didn't know about the dinner, the lies, or the therapy story. By the end of the day, the situation had exploded. She confronted him, told his employer, told their grown children. The man who had walked into my mother's home with false humility was suddenly stripped bare in front of the world he had built. Within 24 hours, everything collapsed. His wife filed for divorce. His company placed him on indefinite suspension for professional misconduct. The social pages he had used to display his perfect life went silent. My mother called me crying again, her voice a blend of heartbreak and anger. She said I had destroyed him. I listened quietly and then answered, "No, Mom, he destroyed himself decades ago when he chose to walk away. All I did was show the truth." For days afterward, she avoided me. Then one evening, I called her. I told her I wanted to take her away for a few days, somewhere quiet. She hesitated at first, then agreed. I booked a trip to the lake house where we used to go when I was a child. She sounded surprised when I told her. When she asked why that place, I told her simply that she deserved peace, but not lies. The truth had shattered something between us, but it also cleared the air. As painful as it was, it marked the end of a story that had haunted us both. Sometimes destruction is just the first step toward rebuilding. And that night, as I packed for the trip, I finally felt like I had stopped running from a man who was never there to begin with. It has been 6 months since that night, and the air around everything has finally settled. My mother has been seeing a real therapist now, one with credentials and an office full of books instead of ghosts. She chose this time to face her truth rather than escape from it. The change has been gradual but visible. Her eyes look clearer. She speaks about the past without flinching. She even laughs again, not out of nervousness or guilt, but from genuine peace. We meet every Sunday, just like before, but now there is no silence hovering between us. There is honesty, raw and sometimes painful, but it breathes life back into what was broken. We rebuilt our bond slowly, step by step, through long conversations and awkward pauses, through truth instead of illusions. She apologized one afternoon, sitting across from me at her kitchen table. She said she was sorry for trying to rewrite the story of our family, sorry for dragging me into her need for redemption. I listened, not with anger, but with exhaustion. Forgiveness did not come as a sudden rush. It came quietly, over days of reflection, until one morning I realized I was tired of carrying his absence like a wound. Letting go was not for her. It was for me. I moved into a new apartment overlooking the river. The place smells like fresh paint and calm beginnings. Every morning, sunlight floods the living room, and for the first time in years, I feel present in my own space. I run before work, teach my students with focus, and come home to paint. I had stopped painting years ago because it reminded me of him, the art he abandoned when he abandoned us. But now, holding a brush feels like reclaiming something. The silence of the room is no longer emptiness, it is peace. Last month, my mother sent me a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a framed photo of us from our trip to the lake. We are both smiling, genuinely smiling, sitting on the wooden pier with the water stretching behind us. On the back of the frame, she had written a small note in her delicate handwriting. "Thank you for helping me face what I could not." I held the frame for a long time, remembering how hard that weekend had been for both of us. The first night, she cried until she fell asleep. The second day, we sat in silence, watching the sunrise. On the third morning, she told me that for the first time in 30 years, she felt free. I still think about him sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a strange sense of distance, as if he belongs to another life entirely. Word reached me through an old acquaintance that he had moved again, probably trying to start over somewhere new, chasing another version of redemption he would never find. I no longer need to know where he lives or who he is pretending to be now. The part of me that once needed answers finally accepted that some people are just questions with no closure. Life feels quieter now, but not empty. My mother and I have found a rhythm that feels real. Some evenings we talk about simple things like what she cooked or how her garden is doing. Other nights we talk about the years we lost, not with bitterness, but with the understanding that pain sometimes disguises itself as survival. She says she wants to volunteer at a community center to help women who struggle with abandonment. I told her that sounded like the right kind of redemption. As for me, I have learned to live without the shadow of his absence defining me. I'm no longer the boy who waited for a father to return. I am the man who built himself from what was left. My reflection no longer feels like a reminder of him, but a promise to myself. I do not need to prove anything to anyone anymore, not even to the ghost who gave me his name and nothing else. The other day, while walking home, I passed a father teaching his son how to ride a bike. The boy was laughing, the father cheering him on, hands steady on the handlebars. It struck me how simple presence can be, how powerful showing up is. I smiled at myself, not with envy, but with peace. Blood might connect people, but presence is what creates family. In the end, that is the lesson I carry. Blood does not make a father. Showing up does. And the only man I ever needed to become was the one he never had the courage to be.